Thanks, Phil. Hello, colleagues from everywhere. It's lovely to be here. I thought I'd very quickly switch from my video to a picture of some pigs because that's a much better and more pleasant thing to look at. There is method to my madness, though. I'm alluding to a particular proverb, and what I'd like you to do before I actually spell it out is work out, if you can, what that proverb is, and also whether you think it's true in this context. Just to say, given the theme for today, teaching and learning online, this is a somewhat generic topic that applies to all teaching and learning, all levels, all sectors, anywhere in the world at any time. But I will be alluding to a few sort of digital aspects that can help make this more of a possibility. But it applies as much as it does to analog teaching as it does to teaching online. So ungrading, if you don't know what it is, or you haven't come across it, or you're a bit skeptical because you have come across it, or if you're a massive enthusiast already, I hope that I've got something here that will be of interest to you. I'm going to start with a couple of quotes by way of rationalisation for this movement and then define it rather than doing it the other way around. So this fairly recent quote, I think, is really nice from Shinsuke and Tanner. I'll read it out. Grades can dampen intrinsic motivation, enhance fear of failure, reduce interest, decrease enjoyment in classwork, increase anxiety, hamper performance on follow-up tasks, stimulate avoidance of challenge, and heighten competitiveness. And obviously, in this context, competitiveness is seen not necessarily as a thing that is conducive to effective learning. A whole bunch of reasons why we might want to question how we use grades and what grades are doing in our teaching spaces. Chris Rust, who's an eminent researcher out of Oxford Brookes, has said, kind of a little bit more broadly, much current practice in the use of marks and the arrival at degree classification decisions is not only unfair, but is intellectually and morally indefensible and statistically invalid. What are we doing wrong? These are criticisms of something that is the bedrock of education, particularly and especially in the UK, but globally as well. So what is ungrading? Well, it's not one thing for a start, and that's what I'm going to try and emphasize briefly today. It's a series of goals, I suppose, where the key thing is that you do your best to de-emphasize evaluation through de-emphasizing the focus, the fixation that we and our students often have on grades. I'm guilty of this myself. My daughter goes to school, she has a spelling test. What do you get? Do you get 10 out of 10? Oh, you got 9 out of 10. Oh, never mind. All of that kind of parental reinforcement of the importance of a 10 out of 10 over a 9 out of 10 actually is part of that global culture of attaching greater significance to the grade, the outcome, rather than what words did you learn? Can you use that word in a sentence? That's really what I should be asking in that circumstance. So the opposite is then to emphasize development over evaluation, emphasize development through focusing on feedback. Secondly, it's about increasing the perceived value of feedback. Those of you that work in higher education will know that students very often don't know when they're getting feedback. They think that the feedback that they get isn't good enough, hence NSS scores on feedback often being much lower than teaching and learning scores. And actually thinking about what the feedback is trying to tell them can be really, really difficult if their fixation is on the grade. Oh man, I got a 58, I needed over 60, that kind of thing. So it's turning the focus away from preeminence, and in so doing, addressing some of those issues that I raised in those quotes earlier about reducing unfairness, about reducing and restricting the potential damage that grades can have, and in some way working towards some of the more democratizing processes that many of us espouse in higher education, narrowing attainment gaps, enabling people from marginalized groups to achieve on a more level playing field. So it's not one thing I've said. I think that there are different ways that we can engage with this. Even if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, but you don't know what my university's like. It would be impossible. My EE wouldn't allow it. What about the employers? Let's hold on to that suspicion and skepticism for a moment and just think about where we could, perhaps, as this image is trying to illustrate, dip our toes in the water, or maybe going further, take a bit of a deeper plunge. So first of all, I'm asking of you today is to have a little bit of healthy skepticism, to really think about what it is that grades are achieving, how much you value them. Are you a high achieving person? Do you always go for the grades? Does that taint the way that you perceive grades in others, your students, your children, perhaps? That's all I'm asking of today, the healthy skepticism. But if you want to go further, what could you do? Well, here are a few things listed really, really quickly because we've only got limited time, but conceal the grades within the feedback. This is where digital stuff can really help. I used to do this, I've been doing it for a long time actually, by putting the grades somewhere in the audio feedback that my students get. So they don't just glance at a sheet and read the grade and ignore the feedback. They have to listen to it. I'm pushing them to engage with that feedback to an extent. So concealing the grade somehow. Or perhaps taking it a step further, not having the grade in the feedback, but making it obvious, perhaps if they know what the criteria are, what the grades might be. So discussing the feedback afterwards, perhaps even negotiating with students to see if you can come up with a mutually agreed grade. So we're still using grades, but this is part of the ungrading process. Perhaps have one or two pieces of work that don't have grades at all, completely ungraded, or peer-reviewed work. Or perhaps modifying assessment so that you design out a lot of the assumptions that lead towards a singular grade, focusing more on development at an individual level. All your students don't arrive exactly the same when they come to any class from any level at any transition point. So grading them against a fixed set of criteria actually can be quite demotivating for those that have come a long way but are still just reaching the baseline. So thinking about that as a possibility. Or getting students to collaborate on determining the criteria in the first place and what the outcomes might be. If you want to go a little bit deeper, a deeper dive here, maybe we can start breaking away from some of those things that we do as standard in a lot of school-based education, for example, norm referencing. Everybody's plotted on a bell curve. So if I do work that qualifies for an A 1 year in GCSE, actually the following year that might only get me a C. Is that right? Is that fair? Is that proper? When that's translated into a higher education context, I think it's hugely problematic. And more ipsative stuff, encouraging students to measure themselves against their own progress, rather than looking at others and what other people have got, which grades really focus on. Only summative work, something that everybody could potentially do at year 1 undergraduate, is to do what's called minimal grading, a part of the ungrading process, where you shift away from percentiles to maybe letter bands, so you can only get 5 possible grades, or even just pass fail. First year undergraduate on most degree programs contributes very little, if at all, to a final degree classification. So why do we need grades there? Even if it's a part of the system that we have to build up a grade point average, could we not do something a little bit more focused on feedback and developmental in year 1? Students grade themselves with dialogue agreement, with peer review. You have just a single grade at an endpoint, maybe even a synoptic grade across an entire year. Maybe you preset grades with completion being the main criteria, or maybe, as is quite common in the States, you have an entire institution where no grading actually is the institutional default. Brown University, it's private, but in the States, students can opt to have the ungraded path through their entire degree program should they choose. And this happens. People say, no, this is just one of those things, it's fad, right? But actually, critique of grade goes back way over 100 years. Finkelstein here, I was going to do a voice for this, but I'm kind of conscious of the time, so I'll let you briefly have a read of that. It's from 1913. We can be but astonished at the blind faith that has been felt in the reliability of marking systems. I would defy anyone to say that they could differentiate between a 66 and a 68 or a 72 and a 74 with any kind of accuracy and reliability. That we give those grades then is actually a nonsense. And, I will die on that hill, to be honest with you. Just another example of it's not a fad. This is an article from Time magazine, 1963, about an ungraded primary school, talking about some of the issues and the motivations and all those kinds of things. The biggest challenge that I get when I talk about this is people say, yeah, it's all very well, but it's what students want. It's It's what employers want. It's what the league tables want. It's what they need. We need grades. We want grades. Our entire system is built on grades. PhDs aren't graded. So do we actually need them? And, you know, what I want is to be sat on a beach 24/7 with a massive cigar in one hand and a really large black coffee in the other and a big pile of fatty food in front of me. But what I want and what I need aren't always the same things. We need to separate the pedagogic arguments from the convention arguments, from the, this is what I'm used to kind of arguments. And it's really important that we do that. It is the big area, the big challenge, though. Jesse Stommel on the Hybrid Pedagogy website, which is a website that I would recommend everybody has a look at, says, without much critical examination, we, teachers, accept grades. Students accept they have to be graded. They're made to feel that they should care a great deal about grades. And that conscientious objection, what I'm going for at the moment, is made to seem impossible. I don't think it is impossible. I think we can take it forward. And as Bell Hooks said, the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. And if we're going to do things that are radical, and if we're going to enable our students to be part of that radical journey, then perhaps challenging that hegemony of the grade and all of the implicit assumptions that are built around it, I think is one way that we can actually make that real. I've got a link for you in case that was a wee bit too fast, where I've got a summary of all of that, links to the slides, and even an audio version of the kind of stuff that I've been saying, with a few questions to challenge you as well. But I hope that I'm within time, because as always, I always forget to start a timer. But I'm going to stop it there. Thanks.
You're close enough, Martin. You're close enough. Don't worry. That was great. Thank you. And I do love the fact that Martin always provides these audio options within his work as well. I really like clicking on that and listening to Martin's voice while he's talking. It's really nice. We have time for one question. If anyone would like to ask Martin a question, would they be able to raise their hand so we can give you the ability to unmute your mic?
Hello. Thank you very much. Hello, Martin. My name is Maria Guarnieri, and I teach Italian at the University of Leicester. I found your contribution super thought-provoking, and I agree with everything you said 100%. But this is a question I want to ask you. How realistic is it how can we realistically implement this vision, especially in the British system, which, in school terms, is just a big exam factory, and grades are a driver for teaching and learning, as you said, from a really early age. Is it realistic? What can we do as practitioners to push for this vision? Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. And I'm acknowledging in the chat James's question and Richard's question as well, which relates to what you're saying, and Kyron as well, about the dependence that we have on this, what employers want, what we need. Are we too entrenched? Is it possible to change? I mean, one of the answers actually is that continuum of possibilities is something that I would definitely encourage. I ran a master's program that was ungraded in the sense that it was minimal grading, pass, fail. If I can run it in an institutional system, everybody can. And if people can progress from it and do well from it, everybody can on any postgraduate. And if they can on a postgraduate, why not an undergraduate? But more to the point, when you ungrade, there are degrees of it. So somebody can pass or not pass. And you establish criteria for success anyway. You just don't put a number to it. So actually I used to run access programs, access to higher education programs for people who had been let down, often failed by the A-level gold standard system. And they would come to these access programs and they would accumulate a sufficient number of credits, all on a pass-fail basis, to get to their degree program. And what did the admissions tutors depend on? The qualitative account in their personal statement and in the transcript of the modules that they followed, and in my reference. The qualitative stuff, the stuff that I would put in their feedback. So you're getting something that is better when you shift the emphasis away from the grades. Now, if it means that we have to over time train employers, then so be it. But look at some of the examples that come out of, like I read about the famous, the first, the biggest, the best computer science MOOC that came out of Stanford. They get something like 100,000 people signing up for this every year. Only a tiny proportion pay for the certification, assessment, and marking. But what people do in parts of the developing world is they say, do the Stanford MOOC, we'll employ you if you come and pass a particular test. So people come, they do the Stanford MOOC, they give them an assessment that's problem-based. If they can do it because they've done the learning, they get the job. No grades, no certificate, no actual degree, in fact, but competence-based. And I think that we need to open our minds a little bit to that. It has just occurred to me that I didn't explain the pigs, by the way. And if you'll just allow me, there is a proverb in English, for those not familiar with it, that says you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. And the idea is that we do too much weighing of our pigs, bless them, our students, I should say, in higher education, and not enough focus on actually making them healthy and big and meaty. And I mean, as a vegetarian, it's a silly thing for me to say, but more saleable. So that's the idea there. Okay,
great.
That was
Thanks,
a long
Martin.
answer. Sorry.
And on that note, we are going to have to move on in order to keep the time. But thank you so much, Martin. And there's a lot of chat now, which is great to see. So yeah, that can continue going on.